Ja, pünktlich 17 Uhr. Wir leiten ein zum...
Right on time, it's 5 o'clock, and this takes us to the last session in this afternoon. And I have a great digital assistant here. Perhaps they could take over my job, or Alexa, could you perhaps introduce the next session? No problem, Mr. Beer. With pleasure. Great. Well then, please. Dear audience, Markus Scholz, Director of Business Unit and Corporate Mobility Solutions at Europcar, will now introduce you to the practical use of an internet-based platform for business mobility. I hope you will enjoy the presentation. Well, yes. I would like to speak about, well, you've just heard about disruptive models during the last session, and I think my presentation hews in the same direction a bit, because personal assistants and digital internet-based personal assistants are fairly new. Perhaps one or the other might have already used it at home, perhaps already ordering washing powder, for example, or simply pronouncing the music playlist that you want to activate. Another item that's it's interesting is that you can actually find out about what somebody does throughout the day just by looking at the various orders he places there. But let's take a walk down memory lane here. When I was 16, 17, mobility was analogous, really. If you wanted to travel from A to B, you could take public transport services, not always according to the schedule, or sometimes you could just hitch a hike. Perhaps one or the other here might have tried it. Just try to thumb a ride, taking you to Cologne if you come from Krefeld. In my case, it worked from time to time. And then, next step, car was very important. Traveling from A to B, and if you started wishing to be able to go to the larger cities, move out of the small hamlet, and then, in order to do so, you really needed a car. And this car, actually, the image is a bit misleading. It was actually green, not yellow. Back then, it was kind of a statement. Then, going to the university, you needed also mobility, be able to go to town at night, or perhaps even drive a bit further. Back then, sharing economy already existed. In its analogous form, you had a wall in the university where you could put up a sign or so. You could just invite people to join you on a ride or ask for a ride. It was quite tricky back then, though, because there was an advertisement, for example, so to share a ride, and there was and in order to call the number, you had a fixed line. You had to call up the person. Very often the person wasn't there, and you had to try several times. And things have become much easier nowadays. Next step, 1992. How did you hire a car, rent a car? You had to fill in a form, and you had several forms, actually, and copies of those that you had to keep. You had to hand in one slip at the company, then go with the form to the parking lot. And I've heard that some companies still work along much the same lines today. But if we look at the type of developments that take place and how development takes place, I have a question for you. Just imagine you're in England at the end of the 19th century. what were the dominant industries of the time? Perhaps those sitting here in the first row might give it a try. Viola? Give it a shot. What is it? In England. Okay, some people point to the timber industry or livestock. Well, actually, ice trading companies were very, very important. Why? Because there was no other way to cool goods. So they went to the frozen seas, cut out ice blocks, and then transferred those into the large cities and sold them on to the companies that needed them or to people who needed them. They were then put in the cellars, and that's where perishable goods were kept. And best thing you could do at the time was to invite people to a dinner party and offer bourbon on the rocks. Why was it called on the rocks? Well, nowadays, of course, you can give ice blocks all kinds of shapes, but back then they were small cubes. Why? Because it was chipped out of the larger block, and very often they were like small triangles, and that's why it was called bourbon on the rocks. And it was a very successful industry, employing roughly 90,000 people with a turnover of 660 million per annum. If you were to calculate that in current terms. And then there was somebody who started experimenting, setting up a kind of like a system with gas cooling, etc. And then he said, look, I have this kind of a closet that can cool things. Are you interested in further developing this idea, further pursuing it? And then people were a bit taken aback. They said, well, we've got great processes. We've really developed it to high sophistication. We cut out these blocks from the frozen lakes, transpose them to Boston, and everything's been tried and tested. We don't need anything new. And so the inventor, was turned away with his strange closet there, and he actually didn't make it with his invention. He died penniless, but there's a tricky thing about innovation. It keeps popping up. Other people took up the idea, and in 1927, the refrigerator was developed to the point that the ice trading companies ceased to exist. And that brings us to the point where we see the speed at which disruption takes place. Back then it was slower, but today it has sped up quite a bit. You know, you're familiar with this. This is 10 years old. 10 years ago, the iPhone was presented by Steve Jobs, and it completely revolutionized the entire mobile phone market that existed. And nowadays, it is the case that this device has become very much the center of our lives, and our lives are increasingly revolving around it. Whether we order a cab, book a hotel room, flights, everything that is linked to mobility can be obtained via the mobile set. And I'm pretty sure that hardly anyone here could even imagine working or traveling without their iPhone. And that means, well, that leads to a situation that millennials say it is worse to lose my iPhone than if I were to lose my car. And that is quite a sea change compared to the initial image that Opel C Cadet, the green car that I had, because the phone was this fixed this apparatus in the corridor of my parents' apartment that wasn't movable at all. And a mobile device was really something that you only saw in a Star Wars film. So a lot has happened. Now Google, this is, they don't produce, but this is the largest media owner, doesn't create any content. Uber, the largest driver services, doesn't own a single car. And Airbnb, and during the ITB, I'm actually staying in an Airbnb apartment because I really enjoy being able to completely withdraw in the evening, and I find that it's much easier to do in an Airbnb apartment than in a hotel room. But they actually don't own a single hotel room or Airbnb apartment. And this extends into mobility. If you look at the projects, of course, this is linked to Europcar, but there are different occasions you need to catch a flight. And I don't want to really get into details there. You want to go out, you want to go dancing with a partner or with a business partner, and then you choose something else, a car to go, my taxi, depending on the kind of journey that you have to make. And during holiday vacations. And Snapcar is much more present now. And you can actually rent out your own car during the time that you don't use it. That sounds pretty scary, or might be pretty scary to us Germans as such, because if I look at some cars here, that's almost as if people were living in the car here. And in particular, in Germany, it's quite a status symbol as well. It's quite a symbol of wealth. And in other countries, people are much more relaxed about that. And this startup is much more successful there. But it's a digital platform. You have a car, somebody else uses it. And all of that is made possible, facilitated via this platform. Once again, a car that is purchased, a privately owned car, stands idle 95% of the time, whether it's in front of your house or on the parking lot at the company. And in summer, this extends even beyond that. And the kind of investment for that kind of space and maintaining that space is enormous. So once again, this is a disruptive model that is rapidly developing, offering a completely different view of mobility and also in terms of communication. But this brings us back to the initial question. How you can book all of this through the iPhone nowadays. And given the development that has taken place in this area, this leads us to the next level, because the keyboard, or the laptop, or the iPhone is slowly beginning to lose its #1 ranking, and something else is slowly emerging. WhatsApp is a case in point. I personally use WhatsApp extensively, but I actually don't talk to it in that, because somewhere in the back of my mind, it's still somehow linked to talking on the phone if I talk. But if you look at the younger generation nowadays, WhatsApp, they actually dictate what they say, and then that's translated to somebody else. So voice is becoming more and more relevant and more dominant. Why? Because the technology that underpins this has become more and more complex. You probably remember the very first impressions that or the very first experiences with a navigation system where you had to punch in the address, and then afterwards you had a voice activated system, but the car never understood it. But nowadays it's quite simple, and you just push a button and you speak out. I want to go to a certain road in Berlin. Very simple. All the relevant parameters are activated, and you don't have to actually type it in. So this is a kind of intuitive interface, and that will be used with increasing frequency. And voice-activated content is a key to that. Nowadays, you can order washing powder or activated playlist, but you can also activate quite useful functions. If you look at the skills of Alexa or others, you can also book a hotel room or a rental car. And why is this the case? Because it is so simple.
To the roots. Ja, in 20.
You can simply go back to your roots. In 2010, when we saw the victory of the iPad, we actually lost, and of the iPhone, we really, in a sense, lost our language, because all we did was type. We typed in every conceivable sphere of our life. So, in a sense, it's a regressive step, but it's also a progressive step. Language is much more relevant and much more precise than what you can type into your keyboard on an iPad or an iPhone. And when it comes to the recognition, it's actually very safe. It's a very secure method, because language, like our eyes and like our fingerprints, are really unique characteristics of each and every one of us, which is very relevant if you think about security. Here you can see all the car manufacturers. BMW is beginning to introduce Alexa in the new vehicles of the future. These new models have Alexa as a standard. So it's not just a question for rental cars. It also means that you'll be able to say when you're on the road, where is the next Aral petrol station, where's the hotel that I've booked, or where can I find a vacant hotel room nearby. Looking for a restaurant without having to type on your phone. Possibly saying to somebody else who's got an Alexa account, please connect me with them. I'll tell Viola that I'll be 10 minutes later. And of course, for the rental car sector, that really has a pronounced impact. Now, about a year ago, when we started addressing this topic, we very rapidly realized that what we were talking about was a skill we were developing, which was to offer a utility to the B2B area. We looked at the store. There's a lot of open skills in there, which are very much user-related. So you have an account, for example, an account with Amazon, and you can book with that account. It's very rapid, and for B2B, from our point of view, that doesn't go far enough. We then developed a skill, but that, unfortunately, was a bit too difficult for Amazon to deal with. It's not their scope, so we set up a B2B portal. But back then, and now as well, it's not within their scope, because we said we wanted to allow others to use it in a B2B environment. The idea would be that at some point in time, the assistant would be able to book for several people, as is the case now with an online booking engine. That would mean you'd be able to say that you know what Stefan's access data are. He was very much involved in development, by the way. I'd like to book for him, and I'd like to book for Viola and for Ingo, and I've got the relevant access codes, so you'd be able to do this securely. And that would be possible in an environment which, with an open skill, is currently not possible. There's also the idea of ensuring that the travel policy can underpin that. You have the travel policy and the preferences, the contract idea with the relevant rates for the customer in question. And then we went along to Amazon. They said, oh dear, oh dear. With our partner with whom we developed this, we looked at this in greater detail. It was, however, rejected. In Germany, they wouldn't include it in the normal store. We tried it out at the European headquarters of Amazon. And they said, well, that's great. But somehow or other, it doesn't really fit with our current system. So last week we had the final discussions in Seattle, and they said, well, this is fantastic, but we can't have this within the store. But why don't you use this as a beta system? It's the same environment. Why don't you offer it to your customers? And then we can see whether we can offer this in the near future in the B2B store. So how does it work? Let's have a look now at the video.
Öffne Europcar.
Willkommen bei Europcar. Nennen Sie bitte Ihre Fahrer-ID.
4 4 9 7 3 2 3 8.
Nennen Sie bitte Ihren PIN.
0 6 3 0.
Ihre Daten werden geprüft. Einen Moment bitte. Hallo Herr Lahl. Was kann ich für Sie tun?
So, das heißt, Sie sehen hier den Identifikationsprozess.
So you have the identification process, the driver idea, and the relevant PIN code. It's exactly the way you do it in online context with your iPhone. Here it's very intuitive, with voice commands. The relevant questions are put to you and the system automatically recognizes who you are. And in the background, you have the data from the company and the general data about the contract. So let's look at the next skill.
Ein Auto mieten.
Folgende Daten sind für eine Reservierung hinterlegt. Autokategorie, VW Golf 7 oder vergleichbar. Anmietzeitpunkt, 5. März, 10 Uhr. Anmietstation, Hamburg-Rüdingsmarkt. Abgabezeitpunkt, 6. März, 10 Uhr. Abgabestation, Hamburg-Rüdingsmarkt. Zusatzausstattung, Diesel. Der Preis beträgt 45,49 € für den gewünschten Zeitraum. Sie können nun Ihre Daten ändern oder reservieren.
So, und hier ist halt der Punkt, alle Daten und
So all of the data and all of the preferences are stored. So that means the user can go along and can say, you have the general framework data because you travel fairly frequently to A to B. In Hamburg, I always pick it up at Rödingsmarkt. And in fact, that's also where I drop it off again as well. You don't need to input all of the data because they're already stored. But you can change these data if you want to, of course. We worked on this video 3 months ago in Hamburg. Then diesel wasn't quite so high up the agenda as it is now. You can also go for an electric car even. You can select all of the details in advance. And you'd have to really type a great deal otherwise, either in an online booking engine or via your smartphone. And what you do is just go along and talk to it. You just chat with Alexa. She sees your preferences, which are stored. So, the next point now.
Kategorie ändern.
Kategorien werden geladen. Einen Moment bitte. Folgende Kategorien stehen Ihnen zur Verfügung. Ihre Reservierung wurde auf VW Golf 7 oder ähnlich angepasst. Wie kann ich Ihnen sonst helfen?
Und das ist das Schöne an der Show.
And that's the great thing about this. It's much better than Amazon Echo, which is just voice directed. There are some elements in booking which you might actually want to have a look at in a hotel room. For example, it might be the room category, a comfort room, standard room, or a junior suite. In this case, it's about having a look at the actual vehicle that's selected. I guess most people in the car would know what a Golf looks like, but you might decide that you want to have a Passat and want to check exactly what a Passat looks like, for example. So it's combining haptic elements and voice, and at the end of the day, you conclude the process.
Konditionen reservieren?
Ja.
Ihre Reservierung wird abgeschickt. Einen Moment bitte. Vielen Dank für Ihre Reservierung.
In Summe, wenn
Overall, then, if you have a standard booking on the basis of your reference data, it doesn't take any longer than 1 minute to book. You don't have to type. In fact, you don't need to do anything except something which is very natural for human beings. You just use your voice. You can book with your voice. You'd have had to do the prior process normally, and that becomes obsolete using this voice-driven system. And throughout the mobility system, there's going to be a lot of different options, which will mean that travellers will be able to travel much more comfortably. There's a security aspect, as I said. Because don't forget, if you're driving along somewhere and you have to type something into your smartphone, you know full well that it's not really legal, but I'm sure all of us have done that at some point or another. So we'll have a secure booking environment. We'll be able to move through it much more instinctively. We'll be able to respond much more rapidly in these situations. We've also agreed with Amazon to have the beta version, so any of you can register here and give it a try. We're well aware that companies are not going to start implementing this from one day to the next, but try it out. Just go along, have a look. You can get registered and see how it works. You just need a straightforward Amazon Echo, or you can have Show as well. I don't want to do advertising for them, but they're not too expensive. But I think that in your company, you can show travellers a different form of travel in the future. Now, I seem to have actually wound up much too rapidly, but that's very positive, because if you have questions, we could discuss them. Is this a form you could envisage? Just imagine if tomorrow we give you a show like this, who would want to book their car using it? So there's somebody at the front saying they'd like to. Ingo would. Would you really do it? You'd really rent your car this way? Any other questions or comments on the topic? Is it something that you'd like? Is it something that interests you, that you think really has a future? Or are you the kind of audience who might say, well, no, we don't want an internet-controlled fridge?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Sarah. I'm a journalist for Hospitality Insight in Germany, but I do not speak German. I'm sorry for that.
No
I wanted to know, actually, if Alexa would be deployed only in Germany for now, or any other markets?
Alexa?
Ja.
Ja, Alexa ist auf jeden Fall schon in Deutschland verfügbar.
Alexa is actually already available in Germany and Show as well. Since November, as a matter of fact.
France or, for instance?
Ich kann jetzt für Frankreich nicht sprechen, aber
I'm not sure about France, but I imagine that in France, and indeed across Europe, that it's probably already available. I think so, anyway.
Thank you.
Weitere Fragen?
Any other questions?
Wie kann es genutzt werden?
How could it be used? What kind of risks might this involve? Because we're always talking about security as well in this context. We discussed Airbnb from that perspective at enormously great length, as a matter of fact, when it first came on the scene. Sven Groß from the Harz Technical College. It's a fascinating topic. I think it is promising for the future, but not for me. I don't want to go down that avenue. I guess I'm a little older than most people who've really grown up with Alexa and smartphones and so on. I had a problem. That chap was on his own. Is that generally the case in firms or at the Europcar office, that you're there all on your own and you announce your password out loud and your registration number? I mean, that's exactly the issue. If you're at the bank or you're out shopping, you also have to make sure that nobody sees your PIN number. But anyone could remember the number if you proclaim it to everybody. So you're talking about security. I'm sure you've given some thought to that. How do you want to get this into firms or indeed in your own Europcar offices? Are there going to be good old phone boxes where people will talk, or how's it going to work exactly? That's a good question. I'm turning 50 this year and I can imagine doing this actually. I can really imagine doing it this way. Initially, the question is always, where exactly is all of this happening? What kind of setting do you have in terms of security? We had a similar debate, I believe, when iPhones were introduced. Perhaps not on specifically that issue, but the question was, where would the data end up and who are you giving your data to? And that's actually something you decide for yourself. So we won't have Alexa shows in our rental offices because we have people there and we continue to have staff there. We want to keep the staff there in that role. What it is it's an additional tool which can be used. Now, the college that you are linked to might say, well, we think it's great and we're going to use it, and you'll have that separate room, or perhaps like in a phone box. That's an interesting notion. Or you might have it sitting on your desk. And imagine when you phoned with a travel agent in the past, they also asked you lots of questions. You were sitting in the office and they would say to you, well, please tell me your credit card number if you haven't got them stored with us. And you would say, oh, yes, here we go, 7899253, whatever. You just rattled it off, didn't you? And your colleague sitting opposite you would note it down and go and do his shopping in the evening. That would have been possible then as well. So, of course, one way or another, there are always security aspects which are relevant at the outset. And that's why I said language is very well suited in future to make it even more secure. This language-operated system can be safer because it's possible to recognize somebody's voice. It's very unique. It's your voice and your use of language, and sooner or later the skill won't require the PIN. It will recognize your voice. If we still use PINs, for example, if I were to input your PIN, it would say, well, no, not you. You're not the right one. So you always have to think about the general context, whether you decide to set this up in a separate room or in a phone box if it's in public. I'm not trying to say that this is the booking channel, that there are 3.5 million bookings in Germany will really be covering, or be covering 3 million of them or anything like that. It's not going to happen in one fell swoop. It's something extra. It's, in a sense, perhaps a business toy, in quotation marks, but there is this sense of playfulness, which we also saw in the past with the iPhone. And people realize that it is actually quite an easy way to do things, and it's rather convenient. Another question at the back, or not? I can't really see anything with these lights shining in my eyes. Was that a question? Christian Klein, American Express Corporate Payments. I think the concept is fantastic. I'd be delighted to use it for all kinds of trips. The thing that interests me is what you think happens next, over and above this concept. What else is planned? Remember we were talking about the OEMs, the vehicle manufacturers. Now, of course, for the rental car sector, this is absolutely crucial, not just for us, but in future. It will also be very relevant for our customers, because if you have Alexa built into a car or some other assistant. All you have to do is say, there's a dreadful traffic jam. I won't be able to get to the drop-off station to leave it, and I've got this grace period of 59 minutes. I'll probably be there in an hour, but I can tell them already that actually I'm only be able to drop it off in 2 hours, or maybe I can extend for a day. You won't have to call them. You won't have to call MD up or anything. You don't have to type anything to your smartphone. You just say, Alexa, tell them I'll drop it off tomorrow. Tell them I'll drop it off not at Rüdingsmarkt, but I'll drop it off in Munich, as a matter of fact, because I've got another business appointment that suddenly cropped up. And that is advantageous for us as well. It's very simple for you to do that, and we know where the car's going to end up as well. Unfortunately, nowadays, our customers often have a lot of time pressure, and sometimes it does happen that clients don't drop off their cars where they intend to drop them off. Now, that sounds completely banal. We've got 48,000 cars in our fleet, but if 10 to 15% of our vehicles end up being left somewhere or other, then we're in a bit of a pickle when people want to use those cars the next day to rent them out to somebody else. And this would be a smart way to make it a little simpler for you and for us. I think that then it'll be possible to move away from the straightforward booking process through interactions as well. You can say, well, Alexa, tell me I'm arriving in Cologne at the main station at 2 in the morning. And it's not a Europcar office that's open all the way round the clock. And I don't know where the drop-off keys are. It's hard to find that at the train station, a bit dark and complex. There in the middle of the night. And Alexa will tell you, well, just go round the corner there, and there's the box, and you can leave the keys. So there's a lot of FAQs that nowadays we either deal with on the internet on a self-service system, or where you can call us up and get the information. Now the information will be available more rapidly to you. Does that more or less answer your question? Yes, thank you.
Noch jemand mit einer Frage?
Anybody else have a question?
Ja, hallo. Warum haben Sie das denn nicht als App entwickelt?
Why didn't you develop this as an app for the iPhone?
Ich muss jetzt 30 Sekunden überlegen.
I have to ponder for 30 seconds what I'm going to say in response to that. Well, the idea was to have it be voice operated. So your question is really why doesn't this work? There's another one? Another app? Will that be possible? But it's not us who developed that. It's not up to us to develop that. It's actually a question for Amazon, really. We said there's Echo, there's Show. And on the basis of that, we want to develop something because we think it's fun. It's an entertaining kind of innovation. And we wanted to try out, first of all, for ourselves, how it works. We've got some customers. We were at the GBTA, they had looked at it already, and they were really interested in it, and they were experimenting with it to see how it works. And one way or another, this will crop up here, or it'll crop up here, so to speak. Because you combine these various devices, the watch that I'm pointing at now, you can talk into it and say, Alexa, call me a car. Sooner or later, voice-operated systems will mean that our devices work differently. I don't know whether it'll be an app. I don't think it will, as a matter of fact. I guess it'll be maybe a different device.
Ich weiß, es ist der letzte.
Yes, this is indeed the last presentation today, but that also means I've got plenty of time at the end of the day, because no one else is coming along after us. So if you have any questions, do put them now. Otherwise, do get in touch. Do contact us if you want more information. We're delighted if anyone says, this is interesting for us, or this is interesting, but maybe it'd be more interesting if you did this or that in the skill. We have just started working on this. It's not a mass market product. I think it will develop into one. And I'd be delighted if many of our customers were to go along with us on this journey and to give us the requisite feedback. And if nobody has any further questions, then I'd say thank you very much, and I wish you all a pleasant evening. And perhaps you can also book your hotel via Alexa as well, so I'm not just doing product placement or music. Thank you very much, Marcus. That round of applause is most definitely for you.